All right, guys, we got some seriously wild price action going on in Bitcoin right now, coming down, violating the summer consolidation lows from last year, summer 2021. Now, if you're a bull, you may have some PTSD from last May. And it seems like, this May we're seeing another major sell off. I guess the old saying, sell in May and walk away, is true after all. Uh, Again, price coming down here, violating these lows. That's a big deal. There's a ton of liquidity below there. And I also want to bring your attention to the fact that, you know, price came up, set in a higher high on the weekly, right? Came up, closed above these highs, took them out. Then, but you didn't have a trend yet, came down higher high and then set in a lower low. And, that reminds me of the COVID crash back here. You had the same thing. Price, you can't really see it here, but came just above, traded just above these highs, closed above the close, set in a higher high, and ultimately came down, set in a lower low here. So again, another situation where people jumping the gun on trend following got wrecked. If you are doing a trend following strategy, you do want to make sure to wait for that higher low to be formed prior to taking that position. I want to draw your attention to some other interesting things. So right here we got the World Government Bond GDP Weighted Return Index, and actually this screen was printed from a few days ago. It's actually the sell-off has accelerated, so it's actually probably, I would imagine now, at historic all-time lows. And essentially what you're seeing is you're seeing a bloodbath in the bond market, and that has some major carryover implications to every market in the world. Now, there's a lot of different roads you can go down with that. There's a lot of different rabbit holes to go with that, but essentially, what you will see with the bond market sell off is you'll see essentially a dried up demand for bonds, right? If the bond market is an environment where investors can't seek a return, or at least expect a real return relative to inflation, then the capital is going to flow out of that market and it's going to seek other markets. It's I don't want to predict which market that will be. Um, and so I just take a broad opinion that it would flow into just generally into other markets. But I do think that'll be a historical trend we see, kind of for the next decade or so, as the bond market continues to be represent an unfavorable environment for investors. Um, And moving on to, we got some on-chain data right here. So this is the BTC number of addresses in profit. Again, this is a little bit of a data chart as well. It hasn't captured the sell-off, so it's probably even worse now. But as you can see here, it's pretty dramatic amount of addresses that are not really in profit, right? So this is a type of environment where if the market is not in a capitulation phase, it's very close to that final capitulation leg. The final leg that just washes everybody except all the Bitcoin maximalists out of the market. Um, you know, so it's difficult to call that in real time. Again, we'll look back in hindsight and we'll know that. Of course, hindsight is 2020. Another interesting chart here is this. I know we talked about the Bitcoin liquid supply often, but here's that chart. Just continues to amaze me, just because you see this very very strong divergence. Right, you saw a little bit of divergence starting in the early summer consolidation, and then it sort of with this accumulation, Wyckoff accumulation, you saw it here at the base, and then it sort of went with the rally. But then this sell off, right? This area here in the market, right? This is where the Federal Reserve announced their intention to raise interest rates, and then you see a massive sell off, right? But then you don't see that in the liquid supply in Bitcoin, right? It's just ever since that new all time high, it's just made a steady march, and actually it's gone more parabolic. Actually, if you look at the slope here. But okay, so anyway, it's going down, diverging, and then you get this choppy period, get this peak, and then the divergence goes parabolic, right? You get a sell off, and then the illiquid supply gets even more steep of a slope. And that's really interesting. Kind of ties in line with basically everybody besides Bitcoin maximalists being, or extremely long term investors being washed out of the market. And it does seem to represent, coins are being taken off exchanges, sent to cold storage wallets, and kept in that type of fashion. But ultimately, what does that mean for price? Well, you know, uh, ultimately, it doesn't have an immediate effect on price. What you would want to keep an eye out for is if this illiquid supply ever turned down, right? If the illiquid supply ever started turning down and maybe selling off, that would be a really big red flag, and probably a sign that we're really going to get the next final capitulation leg. And by that I mean that the type of capitulation where people run to open their exchange accounts and sell their Bitcoin as soon as they can. We haven't seen that yet in this phase of the market, um, but just from a sentiment perspective, we're pretty close to that area. Now, as far as immediate price action in Bitcoin, um, you see Bitcoin just kind of moving level by level, clearly running liquidity to the downside. It just ran liquidity below here and bounced. But there's really not an actionable trade to, in my opinion, really to play in any direction right now, just because you've had such a wild extension to fill liquidity, and you know you already if there were major funds have their stop losses under here, major liquidations. The For all intents and purposes, I mean, if you were short, I mean, this is a hell of a move, right? You don't need to be any more greedy than that. Um, but on the flip side, this doesn't really constitute a great long area, because you know the trend can always continue. You never know. Um, but I do think that kind of this level would be a good area to keep an eye on. This 28777 level, because again, you can see here we just did a liquidity run below that level. Now we don't have any actionable setup on the low time frame. Again, you could play a price extension, right? It just, if you're playing the very low time frames, right? Price extension fill. But you know, I would just pay attention to that 877, or excuse me, 28777 level. If you get some type of actionable setup on that, I would, and by that I mean the lower time frames start to turn around, and you get some type of retracement into that level. But again, that we just hit the level, we just ran those stops. So even if that did form or play out, it would take a decent amount of time to play out. So there's really no huge rush to get into a long position at this point. Um, anyway, if you guys like this content, just make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.